Everyone laughed when a bankrupt millionaire adopted a homeless girl. Then he learned she's a genius. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you believe in second chances and unexpected brilliance and in the kind of courage that grows in silence, this story is for you. The overhead lights in Sterling Pharmacy buzzed with a sickly green tint as Nate Sterling slowly opened a pill bottle with trembling fingers. He poured 2 tablets into his palm, but only stared at them as if they were strangers. He had not taken his heart medication in weeks, not since the night terrors started again. The pills clinked softly as he poured them back into the bottle. He did not need a reminder of how broken he had become. The old man behind the pharmacy counter gave him a look more curious than concerned. He had likely figured it out already. Nate had once been recognized by Fortune magazine as the mind behind Sterling Bio, the breakthrough biotech company that revolutionized rare disease diagnostics. That was 2 years ago. Now he lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment above the same pharmacy that had once stocked his company's test kits. The irony was bitter and ever-present. He stepped outside into the gray haze of a Chicago morning, early frost clinging to car windows. His shoulders sagged beneath a coat that had seen better years. With no destination in mind, he turned down Jefferson Avenue, letting his footsteps lead the way. He passed a boarded-up coffee shop, a shuttered bookstore, and the remains of a children's clinic, another casualty of the collapsed healthcare initiative he had once endorsed. He did not flinch anymore at the reminders. The past followed him like a shadow. Just as he was about to cross the street, something caught his eye. On the cracked pavement near the public library's stone steps, someone had scribbled in bright white chalk, "If you wheeze after coughing in cold air, check your heart, not your lungs." The letters were small but carefully formed with arrows pointing to a drawing of a heart and lungs side by side. At first he assumed it was some kind of street art, maybe a student's health project, but it was too specific, too correct. He looked around. That was when he saw her. She was crouched against the wall beneath the library awning, no more than 10 or 11, with tangled dark curls tucked beneath a too small hoodie. She held a stick of chalk in one hand and a worn notepad in the other. Her eyes, when they briefly flicked up to meet his, were sharp and impossibly calm. She returned her attention to the page and wrote something quickly, then slid it into her backpack. She didn't beg. She didn't smile. She barely moved. Before he could decide whether to approach her, a man nearby began coughing, violently bent over and clutching his chest. He was maybe in his 50s, a janitor by the look of his uniform. The girl was on her feet in an instant. She approached the man slowly, calmly, then handed him a slip of paper. The man read it, eyes narrowing. He said something Nate couldn't hear. Then he straightened and nodded, walking away a little steadier than before. Nate blinked. What had just happened? But when he turned back, the girl was gone. He didn't sleep well that night. He kept thinking about her, the chalk writing, the paper, the way she had moved toward that man, not out of fear, not seeking money, but like she already knew what he needed. The next day he walked the same route again, and the day after that. It was on the 4th morning, just as the first snow began to flurry, that he finally saw her again. This time she had set up a small, foldable stool beside the closed flower stand at the corner of Lincoln and 3rd. In front of her, arranged in careful rows, were hand-drawn pamphlets. Nate leaned in to read the titles. What Your Cough is Trying to Say. Danger Levels of Sneezes. A Chart Bruises That Worry Doctors. Where It Hurts versus What It Means. Each was priced at $1. Some had tiny color-coded stickers. She didn't speak. She just sat there with her hands in her lap, legs crossed under the stool eyes, watching everyone and no one. Nate reached into his wallet. How much for all of them, he asked. She finally looked up. I have 18 today, she said. $18. He handed her a 20. Keep the change. A pause. Thank you, she said. He knelt down beside her, not caring that his knees would protest later. What's your name, Zoe? I'm Nate. I know. That surprised him. You do. She nodded but didn't elaborate. Are you hungry? Her eyes flicked to the brown bag she had tucked behind her stool. I ate yesterday. That wasn't the question. She stood slinging her backpack over her shoulder with practiced motion. Where? There's a diner around the corner. Best pancakes in the neighborhood. She didn't smile, but she followed. At the booth, she sat with her back to the wall facing the door. Her eyes scanned everything, the waitresses, the cook behind the counter, the man in the gray coat who sat alone nursing coffee. She ordered eggs and toast. When the food came, she ate quickly but not messily like someone who had learned to make meals count without drawing attention. Nate let her be. He remembered his own daughter eating like that the first week she was in the hospital before the seizures took her speech. Zoe was scribbling on a napkin while she ate. Nate glanced over and did a double take. The doodles weren't flowers or names in bubble letters. They were diagrams, nervous system pathways, notes on infection markers, corrections to dosage ratios. She covered it quickly when she noticed his eyes. "What's that?" he asked casually. "Nothing. Just thoughts. They look like very smart thoughts. Just ways to make sense of stuff." She finished the last of her toast. He reached into his coat pocket and set the stack of her health guides on the table. "Did you write all of these yourself?" "Yes." "Where did you learn all this?" She shrugged. Waiting rooms, clinic posters, watching doctors mess up. His eyebrows rose. "I listen a lot," she said. "You learn more when people forget you're there." It hit him then how much he had once lived in places like this diner, polished and secure, and how little he had noticed who sat in the corners. How many Zoes had he walked past while rushing to board meetings? The snow outside had turned to sleet. She hugged her arms close. "Do you have somewhere warm to go?" he asked. "I can manage. I have a spare room." She tensed. "It's an office with a couch," he clarified. "Not much, but it's dry. I'll order more toast if it helps." Zoe's eyes narrowed. She wasn't careless. That much was obvious. But something in her expression shifted. A calculation. A line crossed. She nodded once. Just for tonight. He paid the bill and held the door for her. As they stepped into the cold, she tilted her face to the sleet. "You were on the news once," she said quietly. "I was," he answered, matching her tone. "Something about a medicine that hurt kids. Yes." There was no accusation in her voice. Just fact. Maybe that was worse. "You're not trying to fix that anymore." He didn't answer. Because until now, he hadn't known the answer. Back at his apartment, she curled up on the office couch without fuss. She pulled her backpack under her head like a pillow and fell asleep in minutes. Nate stood in the doorway, unsure what to feel. Something had shifted. He didn't know her story. Not yet. But he felt like he had just stepped into a storm he didn't fully understand. A storm with bright chalk and whisper-quiet warnings. He watched the slow rise and fall of her chest. Then he did something he hadn't done in 2 years. He took the medication. Then he sat down at his desk. And for the first time since his daughter died, he opened a blank notebook. Tomorrow he would ask Zoe what she saw when she looked at people. Tomorrow he would find out why a child could spot the truth in coughs while billion-dollar systems failed. Tomorrow he would begin again. But tonight, he simply watched over her and wondered how much damage the world had done to her before he noticed. The morning light crept through the crooked blinds of Nate Sterling's office like a hesitant guest, casting soft stripes across Zoe's sleeping face. Her knees were curled tightly against her chest, arms wrapped around her backpack like it was a lifeline. Nate stood in the hallway, coffee in hand, watching her breathe. He had not slept much. After taking his heart medication for the first time in weeks, he had spent most of the night pacing and jotting thoughts in the margins of a legal pad. His mind buzzed with equations, symptoms, memories, and above all, questions. Who was this girl? And how had she come to know things that even seasoned doctors overlooked? She stirred as the aroma of eggs filled the air. He had burnt the first batch and had to start again, but the second attempt was halfway decent. She sat up slowly, blinking into the light, her eyes immediately darting around the room to reestablish her bearings. Then she reached for her backpack and looked at Nate like someone who expected things to have changed overnight. like the offer of shelter was temporary and now the terms had expired. He set a plate down on the coffee table. Scrambled eggs. Not hospital quality, I hope. She sat cross-legged on the couch, glanced at the food and then at him. Why are you being nice to me? He thought about that. There were many answers. He could have said guilt. He could have said loneliness. But both felt too selfish and too small. Instead, he said the only thing that felt honest. Because I see something rare, and I think it matters. Zoe ate in silence for a while. Nate sat across from her with his coffee, pretending to read the newspaper, but really watching her. She was small, but not fragile. Everything about her was alert and efficient, like she had learned not to waste time or trust. You said you knew who I was, he said finally. How she put her fork down and wiped her mouth with the edge of her sleeve. My mom used to have this binder, she said, with clinic flyers, treatment options. She was trying to find help for my brother. You have a brother, Zoe nodded. Elliot. He's 6. He's in a care center now. I visit when I can. What's wrong with him? Doctors say it's a neural issue. Weak muscles. Trouble swallowing. But they don't really know. The diagnosis changes depending on who we ask and how tired they are. Nate leaned forward. And your mom? She died 2 years ago, in a trial. The words landed like stones. Zoe did not flinch when she said them. She did not cry. She just stated it like she had rehearsed it too many times already. It was a medication trial at a city clinic. They said it was safe. It wasn't. Nate closed his eyes. He had read stories like that. They always made the back pages of journals. Anonymized. Forgotten. What does this have to do with me? He asked softly. Zoe reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded page. It was a magazine clipping, old and faded. The headline read, Dr. Nathaniel Sterling's DNA Pathway Project could save millions. In the photograph, he stood proudly beside a digital rendering of a double helix. My mom circled your name, Zoe said. She wrote, possible solution, in the margin. I think she believed you could help Elliot. Nate swallowed hard. The article had been written shortly before everything collapsed. The diagnostics they were developing had been revolutionary. Then came the data breach, the safety audit, the lawsuit, the fallout, his own daughter's seizure in the clinic room, the media storm. He had buried everything. I didn't think anyone remembered that, he said quietly. I remembered, Zoe said, and I started looking. Not online, in libraries, on paper, because sometimes digital stuff disappears. You found me? She nodded. Took a while. You were harder to find than you think. But I watched. I waited. And I followed. You were following me. I didn't think you'd listen if I just walked up and said my brother needs help. So, I waited for you to see something first. Like the cough guy. And the guides. He leaned back in his chair, stunned. She had planned all of it. The chalk, the cough warnings, the pamphlets, a carefully laid strategy. Not for money, not for food, for trust. You set a trap, he said almost admiringly. I made a plan, she corrected. Same thing maybe, but not to trick you, just to get your attention. Nate rubbed his face, overwhelmed by the realization. You could have gone to someone else. I tried, she said. No one else listened. A quiet settled between them. Outside, the city was waking up, oblivious to the quiet revolution taking place in the small apartment above a pharmacy. Nate stood and paced for a moment, his heart skipping more than he liked. Your brother. Where is he now? St. Marin's Pediatric Home. On the south side. Can you take me to him? Zoe tilted her head. Why? Because I want to meet him. And because if I can still read symptoms the way I used to, maybe I'll see something others missed. She watched him carefully, searching for the lie. Whatever she saw, she accepted it. Okay, she said. But not as a doctor. They don't like doctors there. I'll go as your friend, he said. And you can't wear that coat. You look like a pharmaceutical rep. He chuckled. It was the first real laugh he had let out in months. That afternoon, they boarded the train to the south side. Zoe remained alert the entire ride, scanning faces, watching reflections in the windows. When they stepped off near the pediatric center, she took a detour through a side alley and emerged near the back entrance. She waved at a nurse by name. Clearly, she had done this many times. The facility was clean, but worn. Bright posters lined the walls. The air smelled like lemon wipes and hospital-grade soap. Zoe led him to a room where 3 children were gathered around a low table coloring. One of them was Elliot. He had the same dark curls as Zoe, though his were shorter and finer. His head drooped slightly, as he focused on his drawing one shoulder higher than the other. When he saw Zoe, his eyes lit up. "Zoe," he said, his voice soft and slurred at the edges. She rushed to him and hugged him tightly. "Hey, Jelly Bean," she whispered. Elliot looked at Nate with curious eyes. "This is my friend," Zoe said. "He used to be a science man, like in cartoons." "Did you make rockets?" Elliot asked. "Not rockets," Nate replied. "I tried to make medicine." Elliot nodded. "Medicine is okay. I like Band-Aids better." Zoe helped Elliot sit on a cushioned bench while Nate knelt down and observed carefully. He asked Elliot to touch his nose, then his ears. He watched the tremor in his fingers, the slight delay in coordination, the stiffness in the neck. He asked a few questions. Elliot answered each with honesty, even when he had to pause to breathe. After 20 minutes, Nate stood and turned to Zoe. "He's not just misdiagnosed, he's misclassified. His symptoms align with a rare neurodevelopmental pathway disorder. If I'm right, it was one of the ones we flagged during our early genomic studies but never got to trial." "Is there a treatment?" she asked. "There was. It never made it through full approval, but the data still exists. I can find it. Maybe even restart it." Zoe exhaled the first full breath she had taken all day. They said goodbye to Elliot, promising to return. On the train ride home, Zoe leaned her head against the window. "Thank you," she said softly. Nate nodded, but his mind was already racing. Something had woken up inside him, a purpose he thought was long buried. And it had not come from a boardroom or a breakthrough. It had come from a girl with a backpack and a plan. That night, while Zoe slept soundly in the office, Nate opened his old laptop. He searched for archived research files, clinical trials, regulatory memos, pages and pages of forgotten promise. Then he opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it Echo Watch, because sometimes when the world refuses to listen, the echo is what finally saves us. Before we go on, your support truly keeps this channel going. Please consider subscribing if you've enjoyed the story. Let's pick up where we left off. The sound of rain tapping against the window pulled Nate from the screen. He had been up since dawn, hunched over his laptop, eyes burning from hours of reading old research logs and decrypted data reports. On the desk beside him were 3 empty mugs of black coffee, a notepad filled with sketches of neural pathways, and a flash drive labeled Sterling Trials Unapproved. He ran a hand through his hair and leaned back in the chair, staring at the flickering blue folder on the desktop titled Echo Watch. Its contents were still sparse, mostly working notes and incomplete code, but it held something more important than data. It held possibility. Behind him, Zoe stirred. Her blanket slipped to the floor as she sat up, slowly blinking against the morning gray. She rubbed her eyes and looked at him. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Neither did you." "I slept a little." He gave a half smile. "I found something," he said, nodding to the screen. "I think I know what your brother has." Zoe climbed off the couch and walked over, standing beside him as he clicked through diagnostic notes. "PNPD type 2, he said. Pathway neuroprocessing disorder. Only documented in 6 children across North America. We were working on a tailored therapeutic RNA prototype, but the trial was shut down before we could test it. Why? Because the FDA red-flagged another study we were running at the time. Unrelated, but enough to collapse funding, so the treatment was just shelved." Nate nodded. It was stored on internal servers and never published. The data was considered inconclusive. But if I can access the original test sequences, I can reconstruct the model. Maybe even personalize it for Elliot. Zoe was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What do you need?" Nate looked at her, startled by the question. Not, "Can you do it or will it work?" Just a simple, strategic, "What do you need?" I need access to my old lab records, he said, and someone who knows how to get around the new firewalls they've put up since the company rebranded. She nodded. I can try. Nate raised an eyebrow. You can try. I've seen your old login, she said, shrugging. In the library. Some of your talks were still cached on research databases. I learned your email ID and password style. I figured you used Fibonacci numbers in your passphrases. You hacked my lectures, I studied them. He stared at her for a beat, unsure whether to be amazed or terrified. Zoe walked to her backpack and pulled out a beat-up tablet. She opened a browser and tapped with confident precision, her small fingers navigating like a professional. What's the server tag? Nate gave it to her, and she began cross-referencing public clinical records with archived press releases from Sterling Bio's final year. Nate leaned in as data columns appeared, case numbers, symptom clusters, treatment flags. I found 5 patients with similar profiles to Elliot, she said. 3 died. 2 were discharged with chronic conditions. But one, she zoomed in. This one shows improvement. Look. Nate's heart thumped in his chest. Patient 0, he whispered. We tested the therapy once off the books. The child improved in less than 6 weeks. But we lost contact. No follow-up allowed. They buried it, or sold it. Zoe looked up at him. To who I don't know yet. She went quiet again. Nate could see it happening. Her brain spinning faster than her body could keep up. Her shoulders were tense, her jaw clenched. She was trying to stay ahead of something that terrified her. You okay? He asked gently. She nodded. But we have to go see someone. Who? A nurse I met at Elliot's facility. She used to work in the city clinics before they shut down. She knows where the patients go when records disappear. Nate hesitated. Will she talk to me? No, but she'll talk to me. If you're nearby, then let's go. They took the train again, this time to the west side of the city, where the buildings were lower, the pavement more cracked, and the street corners more guarded. Zoe led them down an alley lined with graffiti and broken fences. At the end stood a small storefront with faded lettering that read, Community Wellness Hub. The windows were dark, but a bell chimed when they pushed the door open. A woman in scrubs stood behind the counter sorting folders. She looked up, startled. Zoe, hi, Miss June. Miss June came around the desk and knelt in front of Zoe, pulling her into a gentle hug. You haven't come by in weeks. Are you all right? I'm okay, but I need your help. She looked at Nate, then back at Zoe. This him? Zoe nodded. He's trying to help Elliot. Miss June stood slowly and crossed her arms. Name Nathaniel Sterling. Her eyes narrowed. I remember that name. My sister was in one of your trials. I'm sorry, he said. I don't know which one. She was okay. The trial helped her. That's why I'm listening. Nate exhaled. I need access to the discharge records from the old downtown clinic, the one near Halstead and 43rd. Some of the PNPD kids were treated there under a different study name. Miss June tapped her fingers on the desk. That clinic was shut down last year. Records went to central storage. Access is restricted. But you know someone, Zoe said. I might. She studied Nate again. You working with lawyers, journalists? No, he said. Just my daughter and her brother. Miss June blinked. Then she smiled. Good answer. She pulled out a notepad and scribbled an address. Storage depot, 5th floor west wing. Ask for a woman named Shireen. Say June sent you. Thank you, Nate said. Miss June nodded to Zoe. Be careful, baby. They don't like old secrets dug up. Zoe took the note and slipped it into her coat. As they walked back toward the train, Nate asked, You trust her? She took care of Elliot when no one else did. She makes extra food at night and hides it under the nurse's table for kids who are too scared to eat in the cafeteria. Nate said nothing, just walked in silence, watching the way Zoe navigated the streets like someone twice her age. When they returned to the apartment, it was almost dark. Nate reheated leftover soup and handed Zoe a bowl. She sat on the floor, her tablet on her lap, chewing absent-mindedly as she tapped through files. She's hiding something, Zoe said after a while. Who, Miss June? She knows more. Her eyes got tight when you said PNPD. Nate nodded. People keep secrets when systems fail. They learn to survive by staying invisible. Zoe looked up. I don't want to be invisible anymore. You're not, he said. Not to me. Later that night, as Zoe slept, curled in her makeshift bed, Nate opened the secure server again. He began cross-checking Zoe's findings with internal company memos from the months leading up to his resignation. One email stood out. It was from a man named Dr. Callum Price, now listed as Chief Innovation Officer at Voss Biomedical, the company that had acquired Sterling Bio's patents. The email read, Protocol 12 flagged for transfer. Shift Project Echo into temporary hold. Rebranding in progress. Do not retain patient identifiers beyond Phase 1. Nate's pulse quickened. Echo Watch had been their early warning system, a predictive model that could identify health anomalies before they became diagnosable symptoms. The prototype had never been released, but someone had taken it, someone who knew it could be powerful. He clicked open Zoe's sketchpad file. In one of the pages, she had written a string of letters and numbers. At first, it looked like a random code, but now he saw it for what it was, a hash key for an encryption. She had cracked part of the early version of Echo Watch without even knowing what it was. She had rediscovered the thing he had built and lost. He stared at the screen in awe. Then he looked over at her small sleeping frame. The covers had slipped again. Her hand still held a pencil mid-scribble. He gently lifted the notebook from her fingers and read the last thing she had written. They always hide what can help the most. He whispered the words to himself as he tucked the blanket around her shoulders. Then he opened a new document in the Echo Watch folder. It was time to stop asking questions and start building something that would outlast the silence. The warehouse that housed the city's central health records sat in the shadow of the old steel district, wrapped in concrete walls and forgotten promises. Nate parked the car 3 blocks away just as Miss June had advised. It was safer not to draw attention. Zoe climbed out quietly, pulling her hoodie up against the wind and slinging her backpack across both shoulders. She moved with the precision of someone who had memorized every step of an escape route before taking the first one. Nate followed close behind, clutching the folded note in his coat pocket, the name Shireen written in Miss June's careful hand. The building's entrance was plain. A faded sign on the door read, Municipal Health Storage Authorized Personnel Only. Zoe knocked once, waited, then knocked twice more. A small slot in the metal door slid open. Who sent you? A voice asked. June, Zoe replied. Said you might have something forgotten. The slot closed. Seconds later, the door creaked open. A woman in her 40s wearing glasses that looked too strong for her eyes stepped aside. Her name tag read, Shireen M. Only 10 minutes, she said. If anyone else comes through that door, I never saw you. They followed her into a maze of shelves stacked with brown folders and outdated computer towers. The air smelled like dust and formaldehyde. Shireen led them to a dimly lit room at the back. Terminal number 7, she said, pointing. It's off the grid. No wireless, no cameras. Everything here's on backup tapes. What you find is on you. Nate sat at the old computer and booted up the terminal. The screen flickered to life with a green glow. He typed in the keyword, Protocol 12. At first, nothing. Then, one by one, files began to appear. Internal memos, patient notes, transfer orders. Zoe stood beside him, scanning everything with sharp, darting eyes. One file was titled, Echo Shell Transfer. Nate opened it. It detailed the encryption layers used to archive early versions of Echo Watch. But it also included something more: patient reference codes, linked to field clinics, under city contract. Look at this, Zoe whispered. These codes match the batch IDs from Elliot's supplements. Nate blinked. They were using EchoShell to run diagnostics on children without consent. Not just diagnostics, she said. Look at the outcome column. Nate scrolled. Next to each patient ID was a short status: discontinued, transferred, expired, follow-up declined. Expired, he read aloud. They classified dead children as expired protocols. Zoe's voice was quiet and cold. It's what you do when you want no one to ask questions. Nate opened one more file. This one was a list of asset transfers, project ownership logs. There it was in plain sight. The intellectual property for Echo Watch and its subcomponents had been licensed to Voss Biomedical 18 months ago. The deal had been quietly approved by a shell board set up by the former legal arm of Sterling Bio, which meant Lillian Voss now held the rights to the very tool they were trying to resurrect. Nate printed what he could, stacking the pages quickly. He took a flash drive from his coat and loaded what would fit. Shireen returned at the 10-minute mark exactly. "You got what you came for." "More than I wanted," Nate said. "Then you better go." As they exited into the alley, Zoe paused. "Do you think they know we were here?" Nate looked around, his instincts from years in corporate espionage starting to hum. "Not yet," he said. "But if we move now, we stay ahead of them." That night, back in the apartment, Zoe laid out the documents on the floor, sorting them into clusters. They used the city clinics as blind trials, she said. They tested EchoShell's risk profiles on children flagged as medically complex, without telling the families. That's why the records disappeared. And the outcomes that showed success, Nate asked. They buried those too, because it would mean they had to take responsibility for the rest. Nate sat down beside her. "We can prove this. With EchoWatch rebuilt and pointed at these datasets, we can trace the manipulation. But if Voss owns it legally, can we even use it?" "We don't need to own it," he said. "We just need to expose what they did with it." Zoe picked up one document, a chart showing dosage thresholds and metabolic reactions. They pushed the tolerances. "Higher than what you approved. I would never have signed off on that," Nate said. "I know." She said it so plainly, with such unshaken belief, that Nate felt his throat tighten. They worked late into the night building the new structure for EchoWatch. Nate coded the framework, Zoe fed it data sets from publicly available health records. Together they created a hybrid model. The system would flag statistical anomalies in treatment patterns, highlight locations with unexpected child fatalities, and trace the presence of substances tied to unauthorized trials. By dawn, the system pinged its first alert. Zoe stared at the screen. "Chicago West Pediatric Unit," she read. 6 unexplained child deaths in 8 months, all classified as complications of pre-existing conditions, and all enrolled in city-assisted health programs, Nate said. She clicked on the chart. The flagged cases matched the metabolic profile of the EchoShell tolerance tests. Every one of them had been given a compound resembling the unfinished RNA treatment. "They've resumed the trial," she said. "Under a new name. Off the books. And they're using vulnerable families who won't push back." Nate sat back. "We need help. Who? A social worker? One who doesn't answer to them. Someone who knows the system from the inside." Zoe was already thinking, "I know someone." The next afternoon they waited outside a small downtown resource center. When the door opened, Zoe stood. "That's her." A tall woman in a navy coat stepped outside, flipping through a file. Her stride was brisk, her face focused. Zoe walked up and tapped her arm. "Miss Samira." The woman turned, surprised. Then her face softened. "Zoe, it's been a while. I need to talk to you." Samira looked at Nate, cautious. "He's with me," Zoe said. "This is Nate Sterling." Samira's eyes widened. "I know that name." "Everyone does," Nate said. "But not everyone knows the truth." They sat in a cafe 3 blocks away in the corner booth furthest from the window. Zoe laid the documents out on the table. Samira read in silence, her expression darkening with every page. "They're testing again," Zoe said. "And kids are dying. Quietly." "I've seen some of these names," Samira said. "But the files disappeared before I could follow up. We were told it was due to transfers or family relocations." "They weren't," Nate said. "They were erased." Samira looked at him. "You're trying to bring this to light." "Yes. But we can't go public yet. We need more. If we make a move now, they'll cover the rest." Samira tapped the paper. "There's a clinic in Logan Square. Just reopened last month. Quiet. No signs. Mostly referral-based. I've had a few kids moved there with no follow-up allowed. You can get us in, maybe. As a consultant team." "I don't need a cover," Zoe said. "I'll go as a patient." "No," Nate said firmly. "I've done it before. They won't suspect a kid asking questions. It's too dangerous. So is waiting." Samira leaned back. "She's not wrong. The longer we delay, the more families get pulled in." Nate looked between them, torn. but he saw it in Zoe's eyes, calculated courage, not recklessness. "Okay," he said, "but we do it together, and we record everything." Back at the apartment, Nate adjusted the Echo Watch filters. They would program a tracker based on Zoe's movement and any new data she collected. Samira provided her with a temporary referral form, faked but convincing enough. The plan was set. Zoe was going in. Nate stayed up late preparing a secondary server in case their system was compromised. He checked every data path twice. Then he walked to the office and found Zoe curled on the couch, her backpack in her arms. "Are you scared?" he asked. She looked at him, eyes wide but steady. Of being caught? No. Of not being believed again? Always. He sat beside her and pulled the blanket over them both. "You're not alone this time." She nodded. "I know." And in that silence, father and daughter stared at the quiet glow of the monitor. Outside, the city moved, as it always had. But inside that small apartment above a pharmacy, a war was beginning, and a 10-year-old girl was about to walk into the shadows with only her courage and a code to guide her. Just a breath. Every subscriber makes a difference. Please consider subscribing to help us keep this channel alive. Let's return to the story. The waiting room at the Logan Square Community Wellness Center looked like any other low-budget pediatric clinic, which was exactly the point. Mismatched chairs lined the scuffed tile floor. A cartoon mural stretched across one wall, chipped in places but still cheerful, depicting giraffes in lab coats and bears with thermometers. The receptionist behind the counter wore thick glasses and didn't look up when Zoe walked in holding a folded intake form. She moved like she belonged, like she had done this a dozen times. She approached the desk, placed the form neatly in front of the woman, and waited. "Referral from District 12, Zoe said calmly. The receptionist finally glanced up, adjusted her glasses, and took the form. She scanned it, then glanced at Zoe's face, searching for something. Zoe kept her expression blank but open the way Miss June had taught her. Don't look scared, but don't look too smart either. Sick kids didn't ask questions. Sick kids didn't challenge authority. They just waited and obeyed. Have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly. Zoe turned and sat in the corner farthest from the door, close to the hallway. She glanced at the wall clock. If everything was working, Nate would be monitoring from his laptop, tracking any network signatures the clinic used to upload patient data. Samira was on standby 3 blocks away, pretending to wait for her own case review at the Satellite Social Services office. Everything had been rehearsed, but Zoe knew no plan survived the real thing. She counted the seconds as she waited. 12 minutes passed before a nurse called her name. She stood and followed the woman through the hallway, past standard examination rooms, and toward a back wing that looked newer, with fresher paint and a keypad on the last door. The nurse didn't say much, just checked her clipboard and gestured to a chair inside a small room with no windows and only one monitor. Wait here. The doctor will be with you shortly. Zoe watched the door close, then waited exactly 20 seconds before pulling a small flash drive from the seam of her backpack. She slid it into the port on the back of the monitor and waited for the soft click that told her the tracking script had activated. Nate's voice would not reach her from here. There was no signal strong enough. But the code would work. It had to. She sat back and breathed slowly, counting her heartbeats. When the door opened, it was not a doctor who entered. A man in a dark gray suit stepped inside holding a tablet. He smiled like he had just come from a conference call. "You're Zoe," he said. "We've been expecting you." She blinked. "You have?" He sat across from her. "You were referred here through our special access program, and you've been flagged as a high-potential candidate for an advanced care study." She nodded slowly. "Like a trial." "Not exactly. Think of it as observation with benefits. Better care, closer monitoring, some additional support." She tilted her head. "Do I get to see my records?" His smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "We provide you what's necessary. And of course, you're free to ask questions." Zoe watched him carefully. He didn't introduce himself, didn't give a title, but his manner was too polished to be a nurse, too calculated to be a regular doctor. "I had a friend who came here," she said. "Her name was Lila. She didn't come back to school. The man raised his eyebrows. Patients transfer for many reasons. We try not to discuss others. Zoe nodded and lowered her gaze, pretending to shrink a little. He seemed satisfied by the posture. We'll run a few tests today, then determine if you're a fit for further evaluation. Do I need to stay overnight? Maybe. Would that be a problem? She shook her head. Just tell me before bedtime. I don't like surprises. He smiled again, but now it looked like a mask. Of course. He stood and tapped something on the tablet. Within moments, 2 technicians entered the room. One carried a portable monitor. The other had a tray of sealed vials. Zoe allowed them to prick her finger and place a sensor behind her ear. She counted the steps. She memorized the layout. She traced exits behind her eyes. The moment the door closed again, she whispered to herself, "Uploading starts in 30 seconds." Back at the apartment, Nate stared at his screen. He had not blinked in over a minute. Echo Watch had detected the new data stream and encrypted file transfer originating from the clinic's private server and targeting an off-site database in Luxembourg. That alone was alarming, but it was the metadata that made his hands shake. The patient ID attached to the file was not just Zoe, it was Elliot. The 2 profiles had been linked. He reached for his phone and dialed Samira. She's inside, and they just accessed Elliot's file remotely. They're consolidating data. Samira's voice was tight. They're treating them as siblings in a shared trial, which means they're running genetic correlation. That's illegal without consent. It gets worse. They're transferring encrypted packages offshore. Probably the same pattern they used to bury the last data batch. Can you trace it? Already flagged the node. We need to move. At the clinic, Zoe sat still as another nurse entered and asked her to follow to the recovery bay for monitoring. She walked the halls quietly, noting the cameras above each door. The nurse led her to a room with 6 beds. 4 were occupied. The other 2 had fresh sheets and attached IV stands. Zoe's stomach turned. One of the beds held a girl her age. Pale, unmoving, a faint beep, the only sign of life. The name tag at the foot of the bed had been peeled off. "Lay here," the nurse said. Zoe obeyed. The nurse placed a cuff around her arm and adjusted the monitor. Then she left. The lights dimmed slightly. Zoe reached beneath her pillow and pressed the button on the second device she had hidden there. It sent out a ping disguised as a routine diagnostic pulse. In the apartment, Nate received the signal. The room had cameras, the beds were monitored, and Zoe was now part of the closed loop. He opened the override program they had built. It used fragments of the original EchoShell framework to mimic internal software updates. If the clinic systems accepted the override, it would temporarily redirect all internal data flows through a local server they controlled. The screen flashed green. Redirect successful. He exhaled and picked up his phone. "It's time," he told Samira. "We need to get her out. Now." Samira was already walking briskly toward the clinic's back entrance, badge clipped to her coat and a forged evaluation order in hand. When she reached the security desk, she presented it without hesitation. "I'm here for Zoe Carter. Emergency reassessment order. She's been flagged under review criteria 7 Delta. The guard blinked, confused. "That protocol isn't standard. It is when the city sends it. You want to call the supervisor and wake him up." The guard waved her through. Zoe sat quietly, listening to the soft hiss of oxygen from the girl beside her. When the door opened again, she expected another nurse. Instead, Samira walked in. Zoe's face relaxed in relief for just a second. Then she composed herself. "New orders," Samira said loudly. "You're being transferred." Zoe nodded and slid off the bed. She walked calmly like she had done it before. They exited without incident. Outside, the wind had picked up. Samira's car was parked half a block away. Zoe climbed into the back seat. Samira pulled away without headlights. "They accessed Elliot's file," Zoe said. "We know." "And the girl in bed 4. Samira glanced in the mirror. She wasn't on the records. "She's gone, isn't she?" Samira did not answer. Back at the apartment, Nate pulled Zoe into a hug the moment she stepped inside. She stood stiff for a second, then let her arms wrap around him too. "I got everything she said." "The code accepted the flash." He nodded. "We've got enough to prove a pattern now. But we need one more thing. What a witness? Zoe looked at him. You mean someone from inside, yes. Someone who can verify the misuse of Echo Watch and the deaths. Samira stepped forward. I might know someone. But she's scared. She used to work with Voss directly. She saw things. Can she be trusted? Nate asked. She has a daughter, a file that went missing last year. Zoe's eyes darkened. Let's find her. The wind howled outside. The city remained unaware. But inside that small apartment, a blueprint for revolution was unfolding. And at its heart stood a man who had lost everything, and a child who had learned to survive by seeing what others refused to see. Now together, they were preparing to show the world. The wind that rushed through the alleys that night carried more than just cold. It carried the weight of a city that had stopped asking questions. Zoe sat by the window of the apartment, staring through the glass as rain slithered down like tears. Her hand moved absent-mindedly across her notepad, drawing loops and lines that resembled neural pathways and encrypted data sequences. On the couch behind her, Nate hunched over his laptop, the glow casting deep shadows under his eyes. Samira paced nearby phone to her ear, her voice lowered as she tried to reach the one person who could now change everything. Her name was Layla Devane. She had been a mid-tier systems technician at Sterling Bio in its final year and then was recruited by Voss Biomedical during their expansion into pediatric monitoring. What she had seen during those months had haunted her enough to quit in silence. But she never spoke. Not to the press. Not to the board. Not even to colleagues. No one had heard from her in over a year. That is, until Samira tracked down her sister through a foster records database. Layla's daughter Mia had gone missing during an inpatient evaluation nearly 14 months earlier. The file had been flagged as incomplete. The last entry listed her condition as unresponsive, then blanked out. The next line was a dismissal order. No date, no hospital record. Samira ended the call and turned toward Nate and Zoe. Her expression was drawn but determined. She agreed to meet. Tomorrow night, private location. She's scared. She said if she even thinks we're being followed, she'll disappear again. Where, Nate asked. A decommissioned community center on the south side, 18th and Halley. Nate nodded. We need this to go right. Zoe looked up from her drawings. We need to be quiet. But we also need to leave a signal. Samira tilted her head. What kind of signal? A timed upload, Zoe said. If anything happens to us, Echo Watch releases a full packet to the press regulators and independent watchdogs. Simultaneously. Nate met her eyes. Fail-safe. Zoe nodded. Like a dead man's switch. If you don't cancel it in time, it tells the world. They worked through the night programming the release module into Echo Watch. Zoe wrote the conditions. Nate encrypted the triggers. Samira added a visual component, an auto-generated map of flagged patient deaths overlaid on the location of known Voss-funded clinics. The effect was undeniable. Once seen, it could not be explained away. By morning, the countdown had been set. They would have 36 hours to meet Layla, retrieve her statement, and verify the location of the missing medical files. If they failed, the packet would deploy. That afternoon, Zoe visited Elliot. She brought a new origami frog and a tiny chart she had made for him showing weather-based pain predictions color-coded in crayon. Tomorrow's blue, she told him. So stay warm and no running. He smiled sleepily. I like blue days. She kissed his forehead and whispered, We're almost there. Jellybean. Almost. Nate watched from the doorway, heart aching. This was not just about justice anymore. It was about memory, redemption, and not letting another child disappear into silence. That night they dressed in layers and packed only what was necessary. Samira wore a scarf that concealed a hidden body camera. Nate carried a pocket-sized flash drive with a mirrored copy of Echo Watch. Zoe had a folded note in her sock addressed to Elliot just in case. The community center on 18th and Halley had not hosted anything in years. Its windows were boarded, but one door remained accessible through a rusted side gate. They arrived 10 minutes early and waited in the dark corridor near the main room. The air was stale with dust and old paint. Every sound echoed. At exactly 9 o'clock, Layla stepped through the far doorway. She wore a long coat and a knit hat pulled low. Her eyes darted around the room before settling on Samira. Then Zoe. Then Nate. "You brought the kid," she said sharply. "She is the reason we're here," Nate replied. Layla hesitated, then approached slowly. Her face was pale and her hands trembled. "If I talk, I lose everything. You already lost your daughter." Zoe said, her voice calm and steady. That stopped Layla cold. She exhaled shakily and pulled a bundle of papers from inside her coat. "I saved what I could before they wiped the systems. They used EchoShell to run analysis on children without legal review. They labeled kids as predictive assets. Mia was flagged as an anomaly. Her markers did not match the control group. They said she would distort the dataset. So they removed her." Zoe stepped forward. "What does that mean?" Layla's voice cracked. "They called it a humane discharge, but I never saw her again." Samira reached out gently. "We're going to expose it, but we need your statement, your words, your documents." Layla nodded slowly. "I'll do it, but only under one condition." "Name it," Nate said. "You find Mia, or whatever happened to her." Zoe stepped closer and opened her notebook. She showed Layla a cluster of dates and names. "I think Mia is listed here, under a coded patient batch called Group Echo 9. Layla's eyes widened. She nodded slowly. "That was her group." "Yes." "We can find them," Zoe said. Suddenly a crash echoed through the corridor. A door slammed open. Footsteps followed. Then voices. Layla froze. "They found me," she whispered. Samira grabbed her arm. "We have to go, now." Nate opened the back door and waved them through. They exited into a narrow alley behind the center. A black SUV sat idling at the far end. "Run," Zoe said. They sprinted through the alley and ducked into an adjacent lot. Samira led them toward a side stairwell of a closed dry cleaner, pulling the keys from her coat. She had stashed an emergency vehicle here just in case. As they piled into the van, Layla breathing hard and still clutching her papers, Nate started the engine. Headlights flared behind them. The SUV followed. Nate took the turn too hard, the tires screeching. They sped through back streets and across an old bridge into the industrial district. Finally, after circling twice, they parked in a delivery garage Nate had leased during his startup years. It was still off the books. For now. Inside the concrete shelter, they caught their breath. Zoe immediately connected her tablet to a portable power bank and began uploading Layla's documents to EchoWatch. The file expanded with layers of validation, cross-matching patient IDs, matching Mia's genetic markers to previously redacted data. "She's real," Zoe whispered. Her chart was buried under an EchoShell loop. "We can prove she existed," Samira said, "and that she was removed." Nate turned to Layla. "You're free to go. We can get you protection." Layla shook her head. "I'm not hiding anymore." That night they slept in shifts. Zoe curled in the corner of the garage, her notebook pressed to her chest. Samira sat near the entrance phone in hand, ready to call allies in the media. Nate stayed by the laptop, watching the EchoWatch system refine itself with every new upload. At dawn, Zoe woke and walked to the table where Nate sat. "There's something else," she said. "The compound they used in the trials, it has a chemical signature. If we add that marker into the algorithm, EchoWatch can find the others." Nate's eyes lit with understanding. "You want to hunt the formula. I want to stop them from using it again." They worked until the sun was high, fingers moving across keys, scanning documents, writing code. When the system pinged at last, it identified 3 clinics in 3 cities where the compound had been delivered in the past 6 weeks. "They've expanded," Samira said. "This is bigger than just Chicago, but now we have the map," Nate said. "And we have a witness." They gathered around the screen, the 3 of them and Layla, watching the colored dots appear. Red for deaths, blue for survivors, yellow for flagged anomalies, and 1 new color, green, for Mia. Zoe had added it herself. Hope. Tomorrow they would go public. But tonight in the quiet of the garage, they finally believed something they had not dared to say out loud. They were going to win. Before we continue, please subscribe if you've enjoyed the story so far. Your support is the reason we're still here. Now let's get back into it. The garage smelled of oil and dust and the kind of old electricity that buzzed through forgotten light fixtures. But to Zoe, it felt like the inside of a command center. Nate's laptop pulsed gently as Echo Watch continued running simulations. Layla sat nearby in an old metal chair, her eyes on the green dot on the screen labeled Emaya Devane. She had barely spoken in the last 2 hours, but her hands trembled less now. There was something grounding about seeing her daughter's name acknowledged again by a system that had tried to erase it. Zoe moved between the tables like a chess master deep in thought. She carried her notepad in one hand and a marker in the other, drawing connection lines between names, locations, delivery logs, and patient reports. Her curls were tied up in a messy knot, her cheeks smudged with graphite. To anyone else, she would have looked like a child playing pretend in a science lab. But Samira and Nate knew better. Zoe's brain was working at a pace few adults could match. "We have to think like them," she said, circling a delivery record from St. Louis. "They're not just running trials. They're trying to prove something works. That means replication. If they already had one data set from Chicago, they would need another to match. Or contrast. Which is why the St. Louis facility is running different age groups." Nate added, eyes narrowing. "Younger subjects. Ages 2 to 5. No verbal feedback." Zoe nodded. "So less likely to report symptoms." Samira stood beside them, arms crossed. "The formula they used, what is it supposed to do?" Nate clicked through the folder they had decrypted that morning. "It's listed as a neurocognitive enhancer, but there's a line of code in the test results that flags anomalous emotional suppression." Zoe frowned. "They're not just testing intelligence, they're testing obedience." Samira cursed under her breath. "They're training compliant brilliance." Nate leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, and calling it medicine. Layla finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "They said Mia cried too much, that she got upset when other kids were taken away. They said it made her a problem variable. I thought they meant behavioral outlier, but now I think they meant she was too human." Zoe looked at her, and then at the screen again. "She's not a variable, she's proof, and we're going to bring her home." A soft knock echoed through the metal door. Everyone froze. Samira moved to the peephole, hand resting near the hidden crowbar she kept propped by the wall. After a tense moment, she opened the door just enough to see a man standing outside holding a large envelope. He wore a delivery vest and looked down nervously. "I got a drop for Nate Sterling," he said. Nate stepped forward. "I'm Nate." The man handed over the envelope and stepped back quickly, clearly eager to leave. "I was paid cash to bring it here. I didn't ask questions." He disappeared into the alley. Nate closed the door and opened the envelope. Inside was a printed photograph and a note. The picture showed Zoe at the clinic 2 days earlier, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, her head turned slightly to the camera. The note read in block letters, "One step closer. Back off." Layla's breath hitched. "They're watching her. They're tracking us." Nate crumpled the note and turned to Zoe. "We need to move." Zoe shook her head. "No, we need to act." Samira raised an eyebrow. How Zoe walked to the board and circled a new location. Indianapolis. The third facility in the delivery chain. But it's not a trial site. It's a data center. They're storing everything there. Backups, hidden logs, videos. Nate looked at her realization dawning. "And if we get that?" Zoe smiled grimly. "We bury them." Samira exhaled. "It's a corporate data vault. We can't just walk in." "But I can," Layla said suddenly. All eyes turned to her. "They have my ID badge still active on the server. I checked. Probably an oversight because I left quietly. I can get us inside if we move before the next maintenance cycle." "When is that?" Nate asked. "Tomorrow night. Midnight." Zoe stepped forward. "Then we go tomorrow. Tonight we prepare." They spent the next 12 hours building a new shell program. Zoe wrote the trigger sequence. Nate programmed the injector. Samira coached Layla on the entry script and what to say if anyone stopped her. At 3 in the morning, Elliot stirred on the baby monitor they had set up. Zoe walked over, tucked the blanket around him, and whispered a story about frogs that could jump between dreams. By dawn, they were packed and ready. They left the garage before sunrise. Nate drove the van. Zoe and Layla rode in the back, going over the map of the data center for the 6th time. Samira followed in a separate car, serving as backup and lookout. They reached Indianapolis by late afternoon and checked into a small roadside motel under fake names. That evening, Layla dressed in her old company-issued polo, still neatly folded after all this time. Her badge hung around her neck like a forgotten medal of service. "Ready?" Samira asked. "No," Layla replied honestly. "But I'm going anyway." They parked a block away from the data center and walked the rest of the distance under cover of darkness. The building looked like any other tech facility, boring, boxy beige. But inside was the evidence that could unravel years of silence. Layla approached the security gate and waved her badge. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the green light blinked. The door clicked open. She stepped inside. Zoe watched from the alley, fingers clenched tightly. Layla moved through the front lobby, down the hallway, and into the archive wing. She passed one camera and then another. Each one blinked once as if confused, then went dark just as Echo Watch had instructed. Nate's override script was working. She reached the main server room and plugged in the drive. Seconds passed. Then the screen lit up. Hundreds of files appeared, recordings, voice memos, internal chats, charts tracking behavioral deviations, lists of children labeled unfit. Some files had thumbnails. One of them showed Mia in a hospital gown, crying in the corner of a room. Layla's knees gave out. She pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from screaming. She downloaded everything. As the final packet loaded, her phone vibrated. It was Zoe. "Get out." A car just pulled into the back lot. Layla pulled the drive and ran. She burst through the side exit just as a black SUV turned into the front entrance. Samira opened the door to the van. Layla jumped in. They sped away into the night. 30 minutes later, they pulled into a rest stop, hearts pounding. Zoe took the drive and plugged it into her tablet. The files opened one by one. And then she saw it. "Mia's still alive," she whispered. "She's at a research annex outside Denver." Everyone went silent. Nate closed his eyes and leaned back. Then he opened them again. "Then that's where we go next." And this time, they would not just gather proof. They would bring someone home. The road to Denver stretched before them like a scar through the mountains, winding and uncertain. Nate drove in silence, eyes locked on the horizon, while Samira scanned the map on her phone for alternate routes. Zoe sat in the back beside Layla, both of them watching the feed from Echo Watch's new tracker node. They had tagged the annex building 3 hours ago, using the GPS code buried in one of the audio logs from the Indianapolis data center. The location was quiet off-grid, wrapped in snow and forest. It had once been a corporate retreat center. Now it was something else entirely. Nate had not spoken much since they downloaded the final packet. He had listened to the voice recordings, experiments, observations, cold metrics, discussing children as assets and anomalies. The worst part was hearing the calm professionalism in the voices. No anger, no glee, just quiet cruelty masked in data. "We go in after midnight," Nate said. "No security detail changes between midnight and 2 in the morning. That is our best window." Zoe looked out the window at the darkening sky. "Are you ready to see her again?" she asked Layla. Layla did not answer at first. Then slowly she nodded. "I have not slept in over a year. I think I forgot what it feels like to breathe all the way down." "Then let's make sure tonight you get to." They parked in a small clearing just over a ridge from the annex. It was surrounded by forest on 3 sides and fenced with motion-triggered lights. But those lights had a timing sequence. Zoe had cracked it an hour earlier. Lights rotate in a loop. Every 28 seconds, there is a 2-second blackout on the east perimeter. Samira glanced at Nate, just enough to slip through. Layla stared down at her hands. "What if she does not recognize me?" Zoe leaned over and took her hand. "She will. Kids always remember love, even if the world tries to erase it. At exactly 12:42, they moved. Nate led them to the fence and cut through at the bottom corner. They slipped under, then through the trees, crouching low. When the blackout blinked, they ran. Inside the annex, the halls were eerily clean. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled like antiseptic and damp metal. They moved quickly, Zoe guiding them via a small map she had generated from blueprints she found on an old county server. Samira stayed behind as lookout near the generator room, armed with a borrowed stun baton. Layla clutched her photo of Mia and the tiny stuffed bear her daughter had loved before she disappeared. They reached the lower ward without incident. There were 6 rooms. 5 were empty. The 6th had a nameplate that read Echo 9C. Zoe reached forward and touched the door. Nate gave a nod. She opened it slowly. Inside was a small room painted blue. There was a bed with white sheets, a single bookshelf, and a girl sitting cross-legged on the floor drawing in a notebook. Her hair was shorter than the photo, and her frame thinner, but her eyes were unmistakable. Layla stepped forward, tears rushing to her eyes. "Mia," she whispered. The girl looked up slowly. Her pencil fell to the floor. Mama Layla dropped to her knees, her voice broken. "Yes, baby. It is me. I am here. I came for you." Mia ran into her arms and sobbed into her chest. Zoe stood in the doorway, hand over her mouth, eyes wide with wonder. Nate turned away for a moment, just long enough to collect himself. They did not have long. Zoe checked the time. "We have 7 minutes before the patrol circles back." Mia looked up at her mother. "They said you gave me away." Layla shook her head fiercely. "Never. Never once." They lied. Mia looked at Zoe. "Who are you?" Zoe smiled. "I am someone who knows how to get us out." They moved quickly, guiding Mia through the corridor and toward the utility exit Zoe had unlocked remotely earlier that night. As they passed the security station, they heard voices. A guard had returned early. Nate motioned for the others to run. He doubled back and stood at the corner, ready to intercept. But the guard never saw him. Instead, a loud crack echoed through the hallway and the lights cut out. Samira had triggered the generator shutdown. They bolted through the exit and back into the trees. Snow crunched underfoot as they ran toward the van. Behind them, alarms began to scream. Inside the van, Nate floored the gas. Samira drove the backup car behind them. By the time the facility's emergency protocols re-engaged, they were already miles down the mountain. The next day, Layla and Mia stayed hidden in a safe house Samira's contacts had secured. Zoe spent the morning uploading the final evidence into Echo Watch and manually triggering the release. It went live at exactly 9:01 in the morning. Within minutes, reporters were calling. News channels picked up the story. And then the letters began. From parents, from former employees, from doctors who had been forced to stay silent, from nurses who had been threatened, from children who had survived and never spoken. Echo Watch became a global topic within 2 days. Senators called for an inquiry. Regulators demanded an audit of every Voss biomedical project from the past 10 years. But the most powerful moment came 3 days later. A young woman named Maria Ortiz stood before a live press conference and said I was part of Group Echo 5. They told me I was broken, but I wasn't. They were. The world listened. Nate sat in the corner of the apartment, eyes locked on the screen. Samira sat beside him, rubbing her temples. Zoe stood near the window, watching snow fall outside like feathers. "We did it," Samira whispered. "It is over." But Zoe shook her head. "It is not over. It is just beginning." 2 weeks later, they received an invitation. A university in Boston had reviewed Zoe's original research logs. The board wanted to meet her. Zoe sat quietly, unsure. "I do not want to be famous," she said. "You will not be," Nate replied. "You will be heard." On the morning of the presentation, Zoe walked to the podium with Elliot's drawing tucked into her journal. It was a picture of frogs leaping between stars. She looked out at the room full of scientists, professors, and journalists. Then she said, "My name is Zoe Carter. I am 12 years old. I am not a doctor or a researcher, but I am a survivor. And I believe the greatest breakthroughs do not come from brilliance. They come from listening. Silence filled the room. Then thunderous applause. That night they gathered on the rooftop of Nate's old apartment building. The city below pulsed with light. Elliot chased a firefly with his frog toy. Mia leaned against her mother's shoulder, sleepy and safe. Nate looked at Zoe. "You changed everything." Zoe smiled softly. "No, we all did." Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small origami frog. She handed it to Nate. "For you," she said. He held it gently, remembering the first one, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt whole again. Thank you for walking this journey with us. Some stories do not begin with heroes or happy endings. Sometimes they begin in silence, in a forgotten alley, in a child's sketchbook, in the quiet resilience of those the world has cast aside. If this story moved you, please let us know in the comments. We read every word. And if you believe in second chances, in the brilliance hiding where no one looks, in the power of one voice to spark change, please take a moment to subscribe and tap the notification bell. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and your next one is just a click away. Now go ahead, tap the video on your screen. We promise it's one you won't forget.